in Spain, the death toll from coronavirus has crossed 20,000 after it reported 565 more fatalities in a day. Germany has recorded 242 more fatalities, raising the total to more than 4,100. In Iran, the death toll has risen to over 5,000 with 73 fatalities in the last 24 hours. Globally, the number of infections has now crossed 2.2 million with over 154,000 deaths. More details in this report.
The pandemic has paralyzed the U.S. economy, shuttering businesses and leaving 22 million Americans seeking unemployment benefits. Public health experts say the businesses can only safely restart with a comprehensive testing program. President Donald Trump says individual states, not the federal government, are responsible for developing testing capabilities. Moreover, Trump is eager to reopen the country soon and dismisses the response to his plan as political posturing.
Some point in the not too distant future, we're going to have our country back. And it's going to be, I think, really with what we're doing on stimulus and helping people keep their businesses together and their lives together and their jobs, it's going to be better than ever before. I hope so. I really do.
Elsewhere, Georgia has banned the movement of all private vehicles until April 21st to strict a state of emergency. The British government has also stepped up efforts to contain the virus after criticism it was too slow to react on several fronts. Meanwhile, Sweden has warned of the tougher circumstances.
It is a myth that life goes on as normal in Sweden. Many people stay at home and have stopped traveling. Many businesses are collapsing. Unemployment is expected to rise dramatically. There are a wide range of new regulation and recommendation that affects the whole society, also the private lives of people.
Germany says the outbreak in the country has become manageable again, as the number of recoveries has been higher than the new infections this week.
Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan says there are fewer COVID-19 cases in the country than expected. In a media briefing, Khan said around 50,000 cases had been expected by 25th April. He said now this figure has been reduced to just 13,000 infections. He said the government has decided to lift the lockdown gradually. The Premier said screening of 800,000 passengers have been made at the airports up till March. Khan said punitive action will be taken against hoarders and smugglers. He said the decision of not bringing back Pakistani students from Wuhan was correct. There are nearly 7,500 coronavirus cases in the country with 143 deaths and 1,832 recoveries. Now let's move to Russia, where authorities have warned citizens that the Russian capital will face peak of the coronavirus outbreak within 2 to 3 weeks. City's Mayor Sergei Sobyanin also opened a new hospital complex for patients with infectious diseases. Russia has reported a record rise of 4,069 coronavirus cases over the last 24 hours, bringing its nationwide tally to over 32,000. Moscow is under strict lockdown, with its 12.7 million residents only allowed to leave home for buying food or to get urgent medical treatment. Deputy Mayor Anastasia Rakova said all residents must follow the restrictions to protect themselves from the disease.
We will reach the peak of the coronavirus outbreak within the following 2 or 3 weeks, most probably. Today you are on the front line. You are taking on the main burden of the fight against the coronavirus. Today it depends on us how Moscow will get through the pandemic. It depends on everyone, on you doctors, on Moscow residents following the self-isolation rules, on us officials taking timely and appropriate decisions.
Now, in another news, Russia says it holds the U.S. responsible for Afghanistan's political uncertainty by favoring President Ashraf Ghani after the elections. At a media briefing, Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova also called on China and Pakistan to coordinate their efforts to resolve the Afghan crisis. She said the intra-Afghan talks are unlikely to begin until the power crisis in Kabul is resolved. The spokesperson also criticized the U.S. for using questionable approaches while designating certain entities as terrorists. She added, Washington mostly relies on media manipulation instead of listening to the experts in this matter. The US says arms control talks must focus on Washington's proposal for a new accord that includes Russia and China. In a telephone conversation with his Russian counterpart, US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said talks must be based on President Trump's vision for a trilateral agreement. State Department spokesperson said Pompeo and Sergei Lavrov discussed steps in the strategic security dialogue. He also discussed bilateral issues with Lavrov, including the detention of US citizens. Last year, Trump proposed the US, Russia, and China to negotiate a new pact to replace the 2010 New START Accord. But China, whose arsenal of an estimated 300 nuclear weapons is far smaller than those of Russia and the US, rejected such talks. The arms reduction treaty between the US and Russia will expire next February. The Amnesty International says India's internet ban in occupied Kashmir is against the rights of its people. The valley has been under New Delhi's curfew and communications blackout restrictions for the last 258 days. In a statement, the international watchdog said restrictions on access to information through the internet cannot be justified on grounds of security. It called on the Indian government to lift the ban on high-speed internet across the occupied territory. The statement says extending restrictions is adding to the problems instead of solving any. It said UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has also expressed concern over the lack of education of children under lockdown. Earlier, Guterres said children with slow and expensive internet services are severely disadvantaged. The Indian Navy has said that 21 personnel have tested positive for COVID-19 at the INS Angre, which is the seat of the force's Western Command. INS Angre is a key naval base in the western city of Mumbai. The statement said that there are no infections aboard any ships or submarines. It added many of those who had tested positive for the virus were asymptomatic. The Navy said all 21 personnel live in the same residential block, which has been declared a containment zone. The Navy said that they had tested a number of personnel who had come into contact with a soldier who had tested positive earlier this month. According to the latest data from the Ministry of Health, India has almost 12,000 infections and 480 deaths. More from India, over 1,200 migrant workers have started a hunger strike, demanding to be sent back to their homes. Millions of migrants are stuck in different states after the government imposed a sudden curfew due to COVID-19 crisis. Talking to media, the workers said they have completed their 14-day quarantine and they should be allowed to go home. The migrants said they have not eaten anything for the last 3 days as a strike and they do not want to stay in shelters. Meanwhile, the ruling Bharatiya Janata Party's lawmaker Sahindra Singh Chauhan asked people to stay away from Muslims. He said people from certain community are responsible for the spread of the virus and everyone should keep a distance for safety. India has recorded over 14,000 countrywide coronavirus infections with 488 deaths. In Afghanistan, at least 20 officials working at the presidential palace have tested positive for COVID-19. This has forced President Ashraf Ghani to limit his contact with palace staff. Afghan authorities suspect the virus entered the palace on an official document. A statement says the number of infected government employees could even be higher. Afghanistan's Civil Service Commission has already asked tested employees to stay at home until they receive their test results. The order has now been extended for 3 weeks. Afghanistan has recorded 933 COVID-19 cases with 30 deaths. Police in Hong Kong have arrested 15 of the city's most high-profile pro-democracy activists. The group includes 71-year-old media tycoon Jimmy Lai, as well as a number of prominent lawmakers. They are accused of organizing, taking part in, or publicizing unauthorized assemblies during last year's mass protests. The arrested individuals are due to appear in court next month. Hong Kong's government has not given any explanation for the high-profile arrests yet. Earlier, Beijing's most senior official in the city called for a new security law to deal with dissent. Before the coronavirus outbreak, Hong Kong had witnessed almost weekly demonstrations against a proposal to allow extraditions to the Chinese mainland. The Kurdish-led administration of northeastern Syria says it has recorded first death from the new coronavirus. In a statement, it said that a 53-year-old man had died at a hospital in Kamishli on 2nd of April. It added a sample sent to Damascus for testing was later confirmed as positive. President Bashar al-Assad's regime has closed borders, forbidden movement between provinces, and shut schools and restaurants. So far, Syria has recorded 2 deaths from COVID-19 and 38 infection cases. Only 100 patients are being tested a day, with half of the testing carried out in Damascus. Aid groups have warned of the potentially devastating consequences of a severe outbreak in Syria. Russia says Israel's plans to annex parts of the West Bank will undermine prospect of the Palestinian state. In a tweet, the Foreign Ministry said Israel's plan will dent the prospects of creating an independent, viable, and territorially contiguous Palestinian state. The ministry said Moscow is concerned over Tel Aviv's annexing the Palestinian lands. Earlier in February, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said his government had begun to draw up maps of land in the occupied West Bank. US President Donald Trump revealed his so-called Middle East peace plan in January. The plan allows Israel to annex key parts of the West Bank and more Palestinian territories in eastern Jerusalem. A Palestinian association says at least 13 journalists are currently being held in Israeli prisons. In a statement, the Palestinian Journalist Syndicate said 2 female journalists are among the detainees. It stressed Tel Aviv's aim is to prevent journalists from doing their work and covering Israeli soldiers' crimes against Palestinian people. The statement was released on the occasion of Palestinian Prisoners' Day. Over 1 million Palestinians have been held in Israeli jails since 1967, when it occupied West Bank Gaza. The syndicate is continuing its efforts in international courts to expose Israeli occupation to the world. Turkey says it has killed 3 militants of the Kurdistan Workers' Party during a counter-terrorist operation in northern Iraq. In a statement, the Defense Ministry said military operations backed by air power were carried out in the Avashin-Basiyan region. The ministry said Turkey will continue to destroy weapon caches and shelters used by the terrorists. It said over 400 Kurdish militants have been killed in northern Iraq over the past 5 months. Turkey holds the PKK responsible for the deaths of some 40,000 people in a 30-year conflict. Iran has held a parade with disinfection vehicles, mobile hospitals, and other medical equipment to mark its Army Day amid COVID-19 crisis. The Defender of the Homeland Helpers of Health parade was held to underscore the military's role during the pandemic. The annual Iranian military parade features spectacles of missiles, submarines, with warplanes flying overhead. But this year, the traditional parade was replaced by health equipment in solidarity with the medical workers. In a message, President Hassan Rouhani said, "Enemy is now hidden, and doctors and nurses are at the front lines of the battlefield." We have a lot more coming up right after this short break, so stay tuned. Welcome back. In Libya, the UN-recognized government says its troops conducted an airstrike against Khalifa Haftar's Eastern Army at Al-Wathia Air Base. A military spokesman says the airstrike was part of its Operation Volcano Rage. This comes after the Eastern Army carried out attacks on civilian settlements in Tripoli, killing 5 and wounding 18 people. The Health Ministry said a teenager and an elderly were among those killed in the raid. Officials said the shelling has not stopped for hours, despite appeals for a ceasefire over COVID-19 crisis. They said the humanitarian situation in the war-torn country is catastrophic and terrifying. In Chad, 5 people have been killed after a shell accidentally dropped and exploded on a house in the capital, N'Djamena. In a statement, the military said the incident occurred during the landing of an aircraft on a military airport. The statement said a commander and 4 family members died due to the explosion. The explosion also left several people wounded and some houses destroyed. The military said an investigation is underway to know the reasons behind the incident. The UN Economic Commission for Africa has warned the COVID-19 could kill 300,000 Africans and push 29 million into extreme poverty. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres says the continent needs over $200 billion to contain the virus and curb its economic impact. In a report, the UNECA said at least a $100 billion fund is needed to immediately resource health response. The UN agency also basked a call for an additional $100 billion stimulus, which would include a halt to all external debt service. Africa's 50 countries have reported fewer than 20,000 infection cases so far, but the WHO says the continent could see as many as 10 million cases in 3 to 6 months. Without the additional funds requested by the UN, the Economic Commission for Africa estimates as many as 1.2 billion Africans could be infected.
In the past week, there has been a 51% increase in the number of reported cases in my own continent, Africa, and a 60% increase in the number of reported deaths. With the current challenge of obtaining testing kits, it's likely that the real numbers are higher than reported.
Furthermore, the UN says once created, the vaccine against COVID-19 should be available and affordable for everyone. In a tweet, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said the global coalition is required to develop the vaccine, which must be considered a public good. Meanwhile, the UK has launched a task force to support efforts to make a vaccine as quickly as possible. The government said 21 new research projects will get funding from a $17 million investment pool.
We need to apply the best of British scientific endeavour to the search for the coronavirus vaccine. To that end, I can announce today that the government has set up a vaccines task force to coordinate the efforts of government, academia and industry towards a single goal: to accelerate the development of a coronavirus vaccine.
US President Donald Trump has defended his tweets in which he endorsed protests against stringent lockdown measures in several states. At a briefing, Trump said some measures imposed by Minnesota, Michigan and Virginia states had been too tough. Earlier, he tweeted about liberating the 3 states from the lockdowns. Demonstrations were staged in Michigan, Ohio, North Carolina, Minnesota and 3 other states, calling on authorities to end the shutdown. The U.S. has the highest number of cases and deaths worldwide, with nearly 700,000 confirmed infections and over 36,000 deaths. Some 50 refugee children left for Germany as part of an initiative to relocate unaccompanied minors from Greece to other EU states. The minors between the ages of 3 and 15 are mainly from Syria, Afghanistan and Iraq. The minors came from overcrowded camps on Lesbos, Chios and Samos islands, as well as one child from the town of Kozani. Greece hopes to send some 1,600 unaccompanied minors to EU countries in the coming months. Saturday's move comes after Luxembourg took in 12 unaccompanied children from the same islands this week. According to the UNHCR, there are over 5,000 unaccompanied children from Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, and African countries currently in Greece. The Human Rights Watch has asked Malaysia to allow Rohingya refugees in the country and to not let them stranded in the sea. Earlier, 30 migrants died of hunger on the boat after Malaysian Coast Guards refused their entry in the country. In a statement, the international watchdog said Malaysia's government is risking lives by pushing back overloaded boats of refugees. It said Malaysia's claims to support Rohingya rights mean shockingly little when they push desperate refugees back to the sea. The body said COVID-19 pandemic does not create a justification for risking the lives of refugees. It said Kuala Lumpur should adopt systems to ensure that its fundamental human rights obligations alongside public health measures. A U.S. court has put on hold Amazon's lawsuit challenging the Pentagon's decision to award a $10 billion contract to Microsoft. Accepting Pentagon's request, the judge ordered the case to remain on hold until 17th August. The Pentagon urged the court to allow more time for an internal review to reconsider some aspects of the decision. Amazon was originally considered to be the favorite to win the Joint Enterprise Defense Infrastructure contract known as the JEDI. The cloud computing contract is intended to give the military better access to data and technology from remote locations. The November lawsuit accused Pentagons of buckling under political pressure and making an erroneous decision. In the US, a federal court has blocked Twitter from revealing surveillance requests it received from the government. The judge ruled that granting Twitter's request will be likely to lead to grave or imminent harm to national security. U.S. District Judge granted the government's request to dismiss Twitter's lawsuit in an 11-page order. Twitter had sued the U.S. Department of Justice in 2014 to be allowed to reveal the surveillance request it received as part of its draft transparency report. It argued its free speech rights were being violated by not being allowed to reveal the details. The U.S. federal agency NASA has announced its first manned mission in collaboration with private aerospace manufacturer SpaceX. This will be National Aeronautics and Space Administration's first manned mission from U.S. soil in almost a decade. In a tweet, the agency's administrator said the rocket and spacecraft will take off from Florida's Kennedy Space Center on May 27th. The Falcon 9 rocket and Crew Dragon spacecraft will take off from the historic Path 39A, the one used for the Apollo and Shuttle missions. SpaceX will transport 2 astronauts to the International Space Station in approximately 24 hours. NASA has been using Russian rockets for manned flights since its space shuttle was retired in 2011. The COVID-19 pandemic has motivated people around the world to be more charitable. But in Mexico, the philanthropists also include some less than savory groups like its brutal drug cartels. More in this report.
Tough times are always seen as an opportunity for some good PR, and the COVID-19 pandemic is no different. This is also true in Mexico, where the drug cartels are always eager to one-up the government. Daughter of infamous drug lord El Chapo is on the front lines of this drive in the city of Guadalajara. Donations are made through the company El Chapo 701, which legally markets merchandise associated with the now incarcerated kingpin.
It's a basic box of provisions with 13 products which we understand elderly people could need. The soup, oil, atole, all those things that are not hard to cook and we understand can be useful.
Meanwhile, rival cartels are recording their own charitable acts in other parts of the country and are uploading it on social media. This is a far cry from the cartel's usual image, which is often characterized by brutal murders and acts of torture. It's no wonder the Sinaloa cartel has chosen 2 young women for this job, and not the usual gun-toting sicarios. But this is not the first time they have tried to sway public opinion in their favor either.
If we sacrifice our gross profit on each product, we can help. We're not going to suffer. We will be able to refill our merchandise and our products, and people will receive our help.
The Mexican economy has been battered by the COVID-19 pandemic, and things are likely to get worse as time goes by. A spike in cartel activity in such a situation could lead to chaos throughout the country.
In Colombia, startup Rappi is piloting deliveries by robots as a safe way of getting food to the people staying at home due to the coronavirus pandemic. Let's find out more about this in this report.
The boxy robots carry deliveries of up to 35 square centimeters in the capital, Medellin. In a statement, Rappi said the robots complete the last mile of the deliveries and are disinfected before and after each use. The robots are jointly operated by Rappi and US-based KiwiBot. The residents say the robots are fulfilling the demand that the pandemic requires.
Personally, it seems very futuristic to me. But the technology advances in such an exaggerated way that it allows this type of situation to occur.
Rappi has completed close to 120 deliveries each day, with 15 robots in the pilot area.
In Taiwan, tree climbing is getting popular. At a campground, a team of women use ropes to shimmy up a towering 7-story tall China berry tree. More about women bravery in this report.
Tree climbing remains somewhat niche in Taiwan, Now more and more women are embracing the challenge. The credit goes to the island's first international certified female climber and arborist, Sylvia Sue. She says popularity of such gatherings in Europe inspired her.
My goal in organizing this camp is to encourage more and more women to get into tree climbing. We don't have restrictions in terms of climbing experience. We can teach you how to climb.
Many of the course attendees are beginners and are afraid of climbing up a 30-meter tall tree, but they feel a women-only camp is a more relaxed environment. Recalling her first climbing experience, a female climber says trees protect her even when wind is blowing.
I threw up the first time I climbed to 10 meters. I was actually very afraid of heights, but I feel very safe whenever I'm up a tree because I feel a tree is like a living being.
A university student plans to become a professional tree surgeon after completing her graduation.
Every time I'm with a tree, I feel like I'm with a friend and companion. I want to help trim its twigs and branches so that it can happily grow again.
Chang Han Chin, a high school teacher at the camp, calls climbing a magical feeling. Out of the 29 certified arborists in Taiwan, only 3 are women.
In the Central African Republic, 3 civil wars have left thousands of people handicapped or dealing with poor mental health. But many physically disabled locals have found ways to stay fit and active. One of the most popular forms of exercise is wheelchair basketball. Details in this report.
Life with a disability is difficult anywhere, but it's particularly hard in one of the world's poorest countries. But in the Central African Republic, amputees have found solace in playing wheelchair basketball. Players swing into action using tricks to distract opponents, their wheelchair tires hissing across the court. Most dedicated basketball players have to travel several kilometers under the scorching sun every day.
When you are disabled, you tend to be unable to do anything. But through sport, we can get out of this handicap. We value ourselves like others. Why not go to the Olympic Games like others, like the able-bodied? Why not do great things in sport and even have a job through sport? So it gives us our dignity. It gives us hope.
Coping with prostheses isn't easy either. Amputees have to go through hard training to learn how to walk, find a seat in the bus, or how to climb stairs.
I was amputated because of a bullet, and I was walking on crutches. Now with the prosthesis, I can work with my own hands, take care of my children, and be active in life.
But there are other injuries that aren't as visible as an amputation. The Central African Republic has been through 3 civil wars, which has left countless people suffering from mental health issues. Now, officials are working to build a new center to offer psychological help for people.
Of all the cases we get here, 50% are traumatic cases that are related to the conflict. They come here, we take care of them, then we make them custom prostheses, then we deliver them. Then we do the re-education, how to walk, how the person can use his device.
The World Health Organization estimates that there are 30,000 people dealing with amputation or high stress levels because of conflict in the Central African Republic. But the National Association of Rehabilitation believes the actual figure is likely 3 times higher than the WHO's estimate.
We have a lot more coming up right after this short break, so stay tuned. US President Donald Trump has announced a $19 billion relief program to help farmers cope with the impact of COVID-19. Trump's initiative includes $16 billion in direct payments to producers of meat, dairy, vegetables, and other products. The payments are capped at $250,000 per individual farmer or entity.
Today I'm also announcing that Secretary Perdue, who happens to be right next to me, handsome man, and the Department of Agriculture will be implementing a $19 billion relief program for our great farmers and ranchers as they cope with the fallout of the global pandemic. The program will include direct payments to farmers as well as mass purchases of dairy, meat, and agricultural produce to get that food to the people in need.
Brazil's President Jair Bolsonaro has called for reopening the country's borders with Uruguay and Paraguay to restart the economy. Bolsonaro said he was willing to reopen trade while agreeing he will be blamed if the outbreak got worse. Meanwhile, Chile's President Sebastián Piñera promised a gradual reopening of economy amid an expected contraction by 2%. Government data showed measures to combat the pandemic will deepen Chile's fiscal deficit to 8%, the largest gap since 1990. Over in Mexico, President Andrés Manuel López Obrador vowed to inject about $2.5 billion into the economy. Obrador is under increasing pressure as his government tries to fight the pandemic impact and protect businesses and jobs. African leaders, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank have appealed for rapid global action to help countries respond to the coronavirus pandemic. The outbreak is projected to cause the continent's economy to shrink by 1.25% in 2020, which is the worst on record. Addressing an online conference, IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva said Africa lacked the resources and healthcare capacity to address the crisis. She said the continent needs at least $114 billion to cover urgent fiscal needs. Officials said even after pledges of support from bilateral, multilateral, and private creditors, Africa faces a gap of around $44 billion. The World Health Organization has also warned that the rapid development of COVID-19 in Africa over the past week is worrisome. Now let's look at the weather from around the globe. This is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.